Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessica Kofi, and in this episode, we're going to be continuing the series that we started off last time, talking about the upcoming NFL Draft, which is supposed to start on April 23rd. But now, especially with all of the coronavirus concerns, there's no word from the NFL on whether or not that's going to be adjusted or if there's going to be any changes made to any upcoming events. But for now, we're going to operate as if all of these things are still continuing as planned. And we've seen a few pro days take place already. There's no word on whether or not we're going to be able to see the rest of the pro days take place. But for now, we're going to look at the next 5 teams that are drafting and the possible picks that they could use those placements on. So we're going to dive in and pick up from where we left off last time and start with the LA Chargers, who are currently sitting in 6th. Now, there are a lot of expectations and projections that the Chargers might trade from the spot, but for now, again, we're going to operate as if everything is going forward as planned. So looking at the Chargers and the need that they have, they've just gotten rid of their longtime quarterback, Phillip Rivers. They mutually parted ways. And they're definitely going to be looking to fill the next hole, and they could do that in free agency, but assuming they miss out on that, the draft this year is going to be a perfect place for them to pick that up. And they're going to have their eyes on quarterback Justin Herbert out of Oregon. And just to give a little bit of a career recap on Herbert as well, he's basically was a hometown kid that was living the dream up in Eugene, Oregon, where he became the starter at the university as a true freshman. And really, over his 4 years there, blossomed into a touted NFL prospect. He had the second most passing yards and touchdowns in school history by the time he left in 2019. And he also helped turn the program around, that finished 4-8 in 2016 to a 12-2 team in 2019. So he was definitely part of the team that guided Oregon and the efforts that guided Oregon to Pac-12 title. And personally, he definitely made himself look good and put up some good stats, career stats and accolades, like personally winning the academic Heisman, aka the William V. Campbell Trophy. And that doesn't even include the solo performance of probably, you would say, his career that he had, if not his lifetime, against Wisconsin in their first Rose Bowl appearance that Oregon had in 5 years. So, safe to say that Herbert definitely solidified himself as an Oregon legend. Even though people do point out his downsides, the fact that Oregon's offense wasn't always the most effective or responsible for scoring their points, especially when you look at that Rose Bowl game, because their defense caused 4 turnovers that led to them scoring points. So a lot of scouts and a lot of critics would say that relying on your defense to give you opportunities and give you touches isn't a sustainable way to win, especially when you look at it at the next level in the NFL. But he definitely has his contrasting mix of impressive plays and bewildering decisions. Sometimes it might look from the outside looking in. And it's definitely been described that way, especially if you look at his film. So he's really been intriguing to scouts for sure, especially over the last 2 years when they're really trying to evaluate his NFL level talent, whether he's an NFL level talent. So even though he sometimes shows off different areas of his skill set and has a wide range of skills, it's sometimes hard for a lot of scouts to figure out where he really lands. Like, for instance, he didn't really run much during the season. He didn't really show off his legs, but in the Pac-12 title game, he definitely showed a more diverse skill set. Even entering the Rose Bowl game itself, he had 32 touches of over 10 yards and touchdowns throughout his Oregon career. So he may not have shown it off much in the senior season that we saw him, but he definitely has sprinkled in glimpses of what he's able to do with his legs, which is becoming more and more important as we see the quarterback position in the NFL kind of start to mold and change. And it really became the featured component against Wisconsin in that Rose Bowl game because he broke off for a 30-yard touchdown run, which ended up standing up as the game-winning score. And it was his third touchdown run of the game. So he definitely gets the credit there for making the decisive play. But when it comes to criticizing Oregon, a team is only as weak as its weakest players. And he definitely was not their weakest player. You know, even though there were times that we did see him make decisions that are questionable for a quarterback to make, especially if you're looking at their kind of IQ that they could take into the game. And in a situation in the NFL, it's way more important to be able to make good decisions in certain situations. So the fact that he can be inconsistent with delivering the ball, with his touch, his accuracy can sometimes be erratic. And there are times where defenses can kind of track where the ball is going because he has the tendency to lock in on his target a little too long, and that can cause the play to break up a little faster than it should if he was moving at a faster pace. So that's definitely going to be one to watch, and that's going to be a factor to watch when it comes to his NFL capabilities. And another factor that surprisingly is causing scouts to question him is whether or not he can be personable, whether or not he can be outgoing and come off like a natural leader, because that's kind of what people are really expecting from quarterbacks, especially in the NFL. They want them to be a leader. So the fact that he comes off as a more quiet guy and doesn't really look to take the lead and look to take charge most of the time is something that scouts have been questioning about an aspect of his game for a few years now. But that brings us up to his combine and his pro day, which he really needed to focus on improving his draft stock and really just reassuring teams that they are the kind of starting quarterback that he's looking for. So luckily at the combine, we got to see him both interview and work out. And that seemed to really put NFL teams at ease because he was able to put his athleticism and his throwing prowess, which he says himself is his arm is his best asset, which for a quarterback, you would definitely want them to feel confident in their throwing ability. So that was one thing that was always seen as a strength of his. So there's no really surprise. There wasn't really a surprise there. And the fact that he was able to not just put on his athleticism on display, but also his personality on display. And he was seen to be smiling and joking during the workout. He was showing plenty of personality. So that really seemed to draw a lot more attention towards him. And he came out of that combine unquestionably the winner because it did wonders for his reputation across the board. His 40-yard dash time was 4.68 seconds. His vertical came in at 38.5 inches and his broad jump at 123 inches. So scouts came away with a new appreciation for Herbert as a complete quarterback. And it's really earned him a lot of comparisons to a current starter like Carson Wentz. So you can just imagine that going into his pro day, he really didn't have to do any more, put any more effort into what he's already done, but he still impressed again and dazzled again and left scouts feeling even better about him, especially after he threw a 62-yard bomb flat-footed without any type of run-up or anything. So even though the pro day, which was surprisingly still held amidst all the coronavirus concerns, wasn't really necessary for him, he still ended up coming out a winner of that too. So taking a look at now the progression Herbert's career has had, it's interesting to see where he would fit in the NFL, a level that a lot of critics didn't think he'd be able to consistently start on and be a franchise quarterback. But he has a high ceiling. He has a high ceiling, and in this draft, he can be called the most physically gifted quarterback. So that really does that really does work to his advantage. But he also really doesn't have that many wow plays, and just like a lot of people pointed out, a lot of inconsistencies in his decision making on the college level. Having those kind of standout highlight level plays is also seen as important, because that's the kind of effort and that's the kind of level it's going to take in order to be a successful, consistent quarterback on the NFL level. So hopefully with filling in his combine and pro day workouts, hopefully that's enough of a wow factor for scouts and for NFL teams to be able to take him seriously. Because with somebody with his traits and his experience, he has so much potential to improve his game, even just by being surrounded by the superior talent that's in the NFL that can fully help him take advantage of his skill set. So we might not have even seen the best of Justin Herbert yet, and that's going to be really interesting for the Chargers, who desperately need a new quarterback. As I mentioned earlier, they've mutually parted ways with Phillip Rivers, and they really need, after moving from San Diego to LA, they really need a way to be able to draw in West Coast fans and to be able to compete with other teams that are on the West Coast, specifically the Rams, who have winning records under their belt since they've been in LA and a Super Bowl appearance. So a young athlete like Justin Herbert, who has a big right arm and is so impressive mobily, he could definitely do that. And he can give head coach Anthony Lynn someone young that he can groom and grow with and really build a chemistry in LA and really just maybe find their next Phillip Rivers that could be a quarterback that they rely on for the next decade or so. So with his prototypical size, he could develop into that franchise guy that they're looking for and that they need. And that can help a team that's really only made the playoffs twice in the last 10 seasons. And it's even better for him if he doesn't have to start right away, because they're expected to make, a free agency run. And they might still take a quarterback if they do land the big fish in Tom Brady. But they still have Tyrod Taylor on their roster. And it would be a great alternative to keep Tyrod Taylor as the starter until Herbert can kind of get his legs underneath him and be able to take over from him. That's a very solid plan that the Chargers might be able to implement, and especially if their free agency plans don't go the way they want them to. So really, Herbert really sets himself apart as a great option for many reasons, but his ability to work through his progressions and see the whole field, even if he doesn't have the quickest release at the time, he's definitely working on it, and it's definitely have already seen it get faster in his workouts. And he has the presence of mind to sidestep pressure and pick up yards with his legs, which we've seen him do throughout his career, but especially later in his senior year. But that really just makes him tailor-made for the modern day NFL that is so highly reliant on offense and being able to produce offense. So if you put the offensive firepower and support system that the Los Angeles Chargers bring and pair it with that former Oregon standout, he really could be set up for early success in LA. And it'll be really interesting to see what the Chargers actually end up doing with that first pick, with their first pick, whether they end up trading up for it or whether they end up getting a free agent, maybe a Tom Brady. That still remains to be seen, but the LA Chargers could really set themselves up to be a securely run team with a franchise quarterback for a long time to come. So we're going to take our first break, but when we come back, we're going to continue on and see who the Carolina Panthers might be thinking of taking with their pick.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Now, before the break, we talked a little bit about Justin Herbert, quarterback out of Oregon, and how he could really make a good fit for the LA Chargers. Now we're going to take a look on the defensive side of the ball and take a look a little bit at defensive tackle Derek Brown out of Auburn, who has really shot up the mock draft boards because he wasn't as consistent in college as a lot of first-round picks you would expect out of first-round picks. In his junior year, he constantly dealt with double and triple teams, which he still does, but he was able to bounce back as a senior, finish with 55 total tackles, including 4 sacks, 12 and a half tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups, and a pair of forced fumbles, which both came on strip sacks. And he only gave up 5 tackles over all 4 years. So his numbers improved across the board from the year prior. He had 4.5 sacks as a junior, which wasn't bad, but everything else in his junior season wouldn't really scream first round draft pick, wouldn't even really scream second round draft pick to you. But he really was able to turn his game around in one season, incredibly, and he helped Auburn's defense really finish in the top 5 in 2019. So he was able to become a unanimous All-American last season and the SEC's Defensive Player of the Year. So he really is a powerful force, and when you see him on the field, he looks like he's a monster, and he's a really, really big guy with a lethal amount of strength, and that's exactly what you want out of your defensive lineman. So, looking at his pro day and his combine, he really had the same issue as Herbert. He really needed to improve his image, and he really needed to put NFL teams at ease and come off as a reliable player that really could be a plug and play, start right away, and be able to make an impact. So, right away at the combine, he didn't really do that. He comes in at 6'5" and 326 pounds. So again, he's a big guy, but his performance on bench wasn't terrible. He got 28 reps at 225 pounds. And that finished 7th amongst defensive linemen, but he failed to finish among the top of his position at the 40-yard dash, only running a 5.16 in the vertical jump, the broad jump, and in the 3-cone drill. So he was hoping on a solid performance at Auburn's pro day to solidify his status But apparently he did make up for his underwhelming combine performance with his on-field drills. So apparently he wasn't trying to. He was very secure in his abilities, but he was really able to impress the scouts that were watching him and really move up a little bit. So the team's main concern is that he doesn't revert to the below average level that they saw him play at when he was a junior. He did improve his consistency as a senior, and he doubled down on that. He said that he attributed it to just becoming more mature as a person, and he pointed out to the fact that his son was born, his son Kai, as a catalyst for that maturation, which is really impressive and really speaks volumes to his character. So that's one thing that always impresses NFL scouts. And the fact that he proves that it's able to translate not just from his life, but to the field is even more of an incentive, which is why teams are really high on him right now. So as far as his fit with the Carolina Panthers go, the Panthers are really interesting at this pick at number 7 because they really could go either way. They have said they're going to stick by quarterback Cam Newton for another season, which is a great decision. But they really do have a lot of other problem areas and pieces to surround around Cam Newton to make the team more complete. And they are building with a new head coach in Matt Rule. And he's more offensive minded. But my inkling is that with their first pick, because of the way this draft is set up and how deep the class is, my instinct is that they're going to go defense on this pick instead of going offense, because you can still find really good offensive players, such as wide receivers, a little later down in the draft, and there's no shortage there. But he's one of the draft's most talented players, and he also fits the Panthers' need. So that is a perfect combination, and he comes off as a complete interior defensive lineman. And even as a prospect, he screams NFL potential to scouts. So that's really, it's really working in his favor, and it's really given him a reputation of being a low bust option as a draft pick. So he's starting to slide up a lot of mock draft boards and enter conversations a lot more often. But the fact that he's an immovable force at the line of scrimmage, and he's the kind of player that can provide that immediate impact that a lot of teams, especially in this draft and especially in the top 10, are looking for. So they'll be able to bolster the defensive line, and especially with all of their other defensive line free agents that are coming up and the surprise retirement of linebacker Luke Kuechly, which you can't forget about. That was a really big blow to Carolina as well. They have a little bit of rebuilding to do, and starting with Derek Brown is a really good way to make sure that your team is solid on all fronts. So on that note, we're going to take another break. But when we come back, we're finally going to start diving into this probably historically deep wide receiver class.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Now, before the break, I hinted that we're going to start to dive into the wide receiver class and take a little bit of a look at who could come first off the board, because right now it's really a toss-up. And sitting at number 8 is the Arizona Cardinals, who definitely need a wide receiver. And it's really interesting to see who it will actually end up being. But my hunch at the moment, based off of a lot of the hype that's going on following the Combine and some of the pro days, is that it'll be CeeDee Lamb out of Oklahoma. And in case you don't know a little bit of CeeDee Lamb's college history, he has been one of the most dangerous wide receivers in the game for the last few years. And he's had some of the best quarterbacks in the college game to catch from, a lot of them being either Heisman winners or Heisman nominees, like Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts, who's also in this year's draft. He racked up 173 catches for over 3,200 yards and 32 touchdowns. And each of the last 2 seasons, he's topped 1,000 yards. And that includes one season for 62 receptions and 1,300 yards. And that topped the nation amongst receivers that had 40 plus grabs. So he definitely has stood out amongst the rest and is definitely used to standing out. Because he can't even forget his 14 touchdowns and 3 punt return TDs on top of that. So this guy already looks like the jack of all trades wide receiver that we're seeing become popular in not just the NFL, but also in college football. You see a lot of players modeling their game after wide receivers like Tyreek Hill, who are just skilled and fast and have great hands and are just able to outskill anybody that they match up with on the field. But CeeDee Lamb definitely stands out from the rest. And not to mention, he's the Sooners' all-time leader in points per catch, yards per catch, catches over 40 plus yards with 24, and games with 160 plus receiving yards at 6. So out of all the prospects that come out of Oklahoma and all the Sooners that we see, he's definitely been the best wide receiver prospect out of Oklahoma this century, which includes Marquise Hollywood Brown, who was taken by the Ravens just last season, or Dede Westbrook in Jacksonville, or Sterling Shepard with the New York Giants. He has topped all of them, even though they are all solid NFL wide receivers. He has definitely topped all of them as a prospect at this point in his career. So going forward to his Combine performance, it was a little bit on the disappointing side because his 4.5 second 40 time wasn't jaw-dropping by any means, especially for a wide receiver, but he was still able to put on a show, and he had this stellar leaping catch at the sideline after this textbook release at scrimmage, and he really just impressed everybody who watched him. And the fundamentals in his game are just nailed down to the T. And when you add in his 34-inch vertical and his bench press 11 times at 225 pounds, it's just all for good measure because his job there has already been done. And on top of that, at the pro day, which he didn't necessarily need to participate in because he could have just let his results from the Combine stand, but he still put in a solid workout. And even though he showed off a little bit that his quickness isn't, getting out of the breaks isn't necessarily the sharpest, he definitely makes up for it when it comes down to end zone reception and being able to just knowing where he is on the field and having the skill of staying in bounds and still making the catch and completing the catch to the ground. And obviously we know how important that is, and not just football, but in NFL football, with how stingy and specific and how much of a hair decisions can come down to. So he definitely impressed teams that are looking out for wide receivers. And he definitely got their attention because his playmaking ability is off the charts, and he put that on full display. So when we look at him in the NFL, CeeDee Lamb really could fit in any number of places, and there are probably a lot of teams that are going to be clamoring over each other trying to get ahead to draft him, but he definitely projects as an alpha in the NFL. He doesn't have necessarily the top end speed that would you consider elite. He's not slow by any means, but it definitely wouldn't be, you wouldn't say it's an elite level of speed, but if there's any other box on a list that you can think of, he definitely checks it. He's smooth with his feet. He possesses body control on an elite level. His hands are so dynamic. It's almost like a vacuum with the way that he's able to catch and control the ball. And he's an angry runner after the catch, which teams love to see. They love to see a wide receiver who can gain yards after the catch and be tough and not just go down and give up extra yards that easily. So he's definitely experienced in touches, and not only being able to track down the ball, but also manufacture his own touches and get open. And his slot work is top tier as well. He definitely matches up well with most defenders, and he should be able to step into any offense and feel comfortable filling any possible role that a coach could assign to him. And he should be an impact starter early on, no matter what team he ends up going to, because he's already getting a lot of comparisons to players like DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams, and that's a pretty big deal, especially for somebody who's still so young, who hasn't even played an NFL game yet. He's still coming out of college. But he's very eager to make his own impression. He's hearing a lot of the chatter about him, and he's been very humble about it in all of his interviews. And you can just tell that he has that fire to set himself apart from the group. And so far, he's done that. He still does have some developing to do. He's not flawless by any means. I've already pointed out some of his downfalls, even though they aren't that numerous or aren't too big of a deal or anything that couldn't be overcome. His frame is also a little bit on the slight side, but his hands and his agility are just off the charts, and he's a terror when you can get the ball to him in open space. Like, there's no stopping him once that happens. And he's definitely able to duke defenses out well enough to have that happen on a regular basis. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he can translate that to the NFL, but by all accounts, it looks like he can, even though he admits himself that he's not the clear front runner for which wide receiver is going to be first taken off the board. This wide receiver class is very talented and it's super deep. So it really is a toss-up who the Cardinals can take here. But Arizona does have a lot of problem areas, especially on the offensive line as well. Even in the secondary, they have a lot of holes that they have to fill. But the specific idea of reuniting CeeDee Lamb and his college quarterback Kyler Murray might just be too good to pass up. And if they do select CeeDee Lamb here with the number 8 pick, it would create it could create a really interesting offense for Arizona and Cliff Kingsbury and the young core that they're really building around. And it really could end up being a good way to get their future team to build chemistry early and start developing that now. And we could see the Cardinals really turn their team around depending on what they do with the other picks and depending on who they do actually pick at, which wide receiver they do actually pick, if any, at this position. But if they did pick a wide receiver, it would trigger a lot of other wide receiver teams to act more urgently, like John Gruden's Las Vegas Raiders. And with that being said, we're going to go to another break, and when we come back, we're going to reveal what might be a little bit of a switch up in the draft order.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
We're back on the College Football Podcast, and before the break, I teased a little bit of what might be a switch up in the draft order or the draft expectation. And one team that is desperately looking to fill up a lot of roles that they are missing is the Las Vegas Raiders. So, at pick number 9, which originally belongs to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and as of right now still does belong to the Jacksonville Jaguars. But my inclination is that the Las Vegas Raiders are going to trade up and take wide receiver Jerry Jeudy out of Alabama. And just to give a little bit of a background on why Jeudy deserves to be traded up for, 2 years ago, he caught 68 passes for about 1,300 yards. And he backed that breakout season as if that wasn't impressive enough. He backed it up in 2019, hauling in more passes at 77 for just under 1,200 yards. And over the last 2 seasons, he found the end zone combined 25 times. So Jerry Jeudy is definitely a star in his own right. His athleticism is off the charts. He has a quick twitch, which is great for receivers to have because they're easily able to manipulate defenders and kind of outmaneuver them. He has a top-notch burst, so he can definitely leave any secondary player in the dust. His agility and his straight-line speed is a challenge for any back to cover based off just his raw athleticism. That's not even factoring his talent in. And once he gets the ball in his hands, he's a threat to break free at any time on any play. And he has this lateral agility in the open field that is just unmatched. And he just looks stellar and is able to just break away from any defender that's trying to tackle him. He has the ability to just break out and be gone. And his vision on the open field as a ball carrier allows him to just exploit any and every open running lane that he can find. So Jeudy definitely was impressive at Alabama. And obviously it's Alabama, so it's not a hard school to shine at or get spotlight in, but he definitely earned it on his own. And he was able to prove it a little bit at the combine. His 40-yard dash time of 4.45 was okay. He was between CeeDee Lamb and his other teammate, wide receiver Henry Ruggs III. So he definitely came in at average wide receiver time, so not discouraging. But his 35-inch vertical and his 10-inch broad jump combined with his 40 time makes Jeudy a little bit more skeptical towards NFL teams than the public and fans are expecting. So it really does come down to whether or not, one, his pro day on March 24th, when Alabama's holding their pro day, goes forward, given all of the coronavirus concerns. But if it does go forward, it will also be interesting to see if he's able to improve on any of those performances. And that really could increase his draft stock. And he might end up being the first person from the wide receiver pool that's taken off of the board. But for the time being, it looks like he does fall around that middle range, so he might go second out of this group. It's really a toss-up between him and Lamb and his teammate Ruggs. But if somebody was to beat Lamb off the board, Jeudy might be the guy to do it, because his ability to set up defenders with subtle route variations is matched only by his agility, his balance, and his speed. So that just goes to show how special and how high of a level it's at. And he's already earned comparisons to wide receivers like Odell Beckham Jr. with the Cleveland Browns with a similar running style and his movement skills. So earning a comparison to a player like OBJ, especially coming out of college, is definitely a high honor. And he's already following other Bama wide receivers like Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley. But he is also one of the best prospects at the position to enter the pros in years. So given the group that he was just mentioned with that also came out of the same school, and the school that's always ranked near the top, to be a prospect that could top those names is definitely somebody to be paying attention to. And his personality and the humility that he's shown, the fact that he doesn't care whether or not he's the first wide receiver off the board. He just wants to be able to play for whatever team picks him and be able to show why he's special. That just makes him even more attractive as a prospect. And in some ways, he and Lamb are kind of mirror images of one another, because they're both excellent at beating teams over the top. They're excellent at going for the ball. They're both great in the open field. As I mentioned before, they have similar sizes, and their 40 times were very similar. And they have the same type of fleeting foot speed, even though their 40 times might not have shown it. But the fact that they were comparable still goes to show. It still goes to show how close they are. But unfortunately, they also have comparable downsides and flaws. And they kind of go back and forth on whose flaw sticks out more. So Judy runs a cleaner, short, and an intermediate route than Lamb, but Lamb's hands are just a little bit better than Judy's, who sometimes had drops, and he struggled with that from time to time. So that's definitely one area of a concern that scouts have had, and that's definitely one reason why Lamb sometimes gets the edge. And neither was tested really regularly in college by the level of talent that they're going to face in the NFL. But that's not their fault, obviously. Strength of schedule isn't decided by them, and they played who they played, and they definitely put on a show that shows that they are worthy of being top 10 draft picks, despite who they played. So when it comes to his fit in Las Vegas, now the Las Vegas Raiders, after moving from Oakland, John Gruden really needs to make up for the fact that he shipped out Amari Cooper last season to Dallas before his career kind of had a resurgence there. And of course, the Antonio Brown experiment did not go as expected, and that kind of imploded in his face as well. So he's going to be desperate to redeem himself and get a wide receiver that can fill that spot. Even though it's a deep class, he isn't really going to be able to take any chances, and they don't really have any wiggle room or room to lose out on a prospect like him. So, especially with all the other teams, a lot of other teams who are also looking for wide receivers around the same draft spot and also reaching for the same position around the same time. Once the first wide receiver comes off the board, it's really going to be a rapid fire of grabbing whoever comes left before all of your favorite prospects are gone. So for Las Vegas, he'd be really motivated to want to trade up and grab a finishing skill position piece to round out an offense that already features a running back like Josh Jacobs, who had a breakout rookie season, and a tight end in Darren Waller, who also had a breakout rookie season. And they both looked poised to continue their successful careers going forward. Neither of them looked like they would be busts after their first years or fall into a sophomore slump. So putting a skilled wide receiver like Jerry Jeudy amongst that bunch, especially with struggling quarterback Derek Carr, whether they stick with him, it remains to be seen, but it really could be the resurgence that their offense needs in order to right their franchise and get it started on a good foot in a new city. So the fact that Jeudy aligns both on the outside and in the slot, he's exceptional with the football in his hands after the catch, which is so important. It can't be understated how important that factor is. And with this very good run after the catch ability, he's just dynamic in the open field. So his route tree and his traits just make him the perfect fit for a number one receiver. And that's exactly what the Las Vegas Raiders are looking for. So we're going to take another break. And coming back, we're going to take a look at... So we're going to take another break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at the Cleveland Browns and what out of many options they might take with their 10th overall pick.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Now, before the break, we were talking a little bit about the depth of the wide receiver class and which two wide receivers might be the first two off the board. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and move to an offensive line pick that might be going to the Cleveland Browns at 10th overall. And that is Mekhi Becton, offensive tackle out of Louisville. And this guy is a special pick because he is just a bulldozer on the run game. He is huge and has Herculean levels of power, but he's so surprisingly athletic for his height-weight combo size. He's just able to dislodge defenders. He uses his size and power and is still able to move better than you would expect. But he really started off his college career on a strong note, starting 11 out of 13 games in his freshman season, which is really unheard of for an athlete to be able to slot in at 18 years old and have an immediate impact. But that just is a great sign for his NFL ability and how he might be able to transition into the pro game. So after his freshman season, he was recognized as one of the ACC's best pass blockers, only allowing 6 quarterback pressures out of 312 snaps. So that is quite an impressive number, even if you don't exactly understand what it means. Only allowing a quarterback to be pressured, not even sacked, 6 times out of 312 attempts is astounding. And he went on to start every game at tackle for the remaining of his college career. And in 2017, he was part of the offense that finished 3rd nationally and averaged 245 yards on the ground. So he is the kind of player that's able to make an immediate impact, and he's the kind of player that really can affect the game without being a skilled player and without most fans who are watching the game even realizing it. But as great as he is and as strong as he's built, he does have a few weaknesses and a few downsides. His set depth needs a little bit of tweaking, and he's a little bit vulnerable against speed rushers. Of course, mainly because of his size, even though he is agile. It's not going to be the same when you're trying to keep up with really speedy, skilled players. And he sometimes punches and jabs a little bit too early in his pass sets. But that's mostly due to his aggressive nature, and that's not an aspect of his game that's going to go away. So it's more likely that he'll just refine it and kind of mature in that aspect. But the aggressive way that he plays is one reason that teams are so in love with him at this point. And he really has just been skyrocketing up draft boards. But he doesn't just contribute with blocking, because even when he got the opportunity to have the ball in his hands, he scored a 1-yard touchdown run against Indiana State. So finishing off his college career, he was named first team All-ACC and captured the Jacobs Blocking Award for the conference's best blocker. So he really was able to be as impressive as he initially came off and remain consistent throughout his collegiate career. But fast forwarding to his combine performance, he was definitely the largest player there, coming in at 6'7" and 364 pounds. He might not have had the most impressive bench press performance, especially given his size. He only did 23 reps, and obviously bench press doesn't really mean much, and he does have longer arms, so it's a little more difficult with that. But for reference, there was a punter, an Arizona State punter, that did have 25 reps, so it's not the best look for him necessarily. But he still tore it up at the 40-yard dash with 5.1 seconds on the clock, so he definitely was able to make his impact, and he definitely was able to solidify himself as a top 10 draft prospect. And he still hasn't participated in his pro day yet. It's scheduled for March 26th is when Louisville is supposed to operate and work out for their pro day. But again, with the coronavirus concerns and a lot of things not taking place, it still remains to be seen whether or not these will happen. But it would only benefit Becton if he was able to get back out on the field again and work out and show more of his skill set, because he has excellent footwork. He is a top-notch anchor. He has great ability to anchor, great balance, incredible flexibility, and he is so fluid in his movement, especially when it comes to his lower half and being able to maintain his center of gravity, given how tall he is. It just sets him apart. And the fact that he has this mean streak that he plays with, coaches love that across the board, especially in the NFL. He's going to need that. He's going to need that attitude and that edge. And that's one of the most important things that he brings outside of his talent. That's one of the intangibles that is really going to move him further up teams' draft boards than maybe fans will realize. So even though there are other options at this position, in the last episode, kind of covered Tristan Wirfs possibly going at 4 to the Giants, but there's also a good chance that if he's still on the board, the Browns might take him here. But Becton is also a great fit specifically for the Cleveland Browns, who are really in the same place as the New York Giants, because they both really desperately need offensive line love, even though it's for different reasons. But the Browns specifically need the help because everyone thought they were destined for a monster year last season. A lot of people had them going to the Super Bowl as a surprise team, as maybe a Cinderella run. But of course, we all watched them self-implode every week and kind of just fumble having a loaded roster the way only the Browns could, honestly. And they are really looking to kind of shore up that offensive line this season, because they really need to be able to have some offensive flow, and getting Baker Mayfield the protection that he needs really could make that difference. And they need offensive line help probably more than anything and any other team drafting in the top 10, because their front five has just been a revolving door of mediocre players and positions and, short-term fixes for the last 2 seasons. So they have put in money at every other position at this point. They've picked their quarterback. They've traded for and drafted their wide receivers. They've drafted their defensive stars. They've spent money everywhere else, and their last piece is to land a star tackle that can protect Baker and keep him upright, because that is really a difference maker. And one thing we saw last season was Baker on the ground a lot. Without that aspect, this season really won't matter. And any other pick they make really won't have as much of an immediate impact on their season than who they take at pick 10, and whether or not they take an offensive tackle, specifically Becton at pick 10. Because what makes Becton such a great fit for them is his presence and his talent that can push their offense to an elite level, the level that everybody was expecting to see last season. Even though it'll be sad to see him get picked by a franchise that gets it wrong 99% of the time, it's still really optimistic. It would be really optimistic for the Browns if they were able to secure Mekhi Becton at pick number 10, because he is not a player that's going to stay on the board for long if he does make it to number 10. So that being said, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at draft picks of the past and see which ones stood the test of time.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Now welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Before the break, we covered picks 5 through 10 and where each team was expected to go with their picks. But just like the last episode, we're going to take a little bit of a look back in time. But this time, we're going to see which NFL draft picks turned out to be the best selections of all time. Which ones became defining franchise legends, and which ones turned into unbelievable value pickups. So, counting down, starting with the first selection, coming out of Baylor in 1981 was linebacker Mike Singletary, who was picked 38th overall by Chicago. And he's one of college football's greatest tacklers, and we know that. But at the time, it seemed a little crazy that he would slide all the way to the 38th pick. And it wasn't necessarily a bad round for value, because there were a lot of other big names that were taken in that round, such as Chris Collinsworth, Howie Long, Ricky Jackson. But he was a little bit more decorated in college than the other picks, with 7 All-Pro seasons, 10 Pro Bowls, and he was named 1985 and 1988 NFL Defensive Player of the Years during his 12-year career. Now, the next pick came in 1957, a little ways back, but the name still has recognition to this day because it's running back Jim Brown out of Syracuse, who was picked at number 6 by Cleveland. So out of the 5 players that were taken before him, out of that group, 2 were Hall of Famers and only 1 was a solid long-time starting quarterback, John Brodie. But Jim Brown definitely stands out as the biggest name of them all, going on to play for 9 years, have 8 All-Pro seasons, 9 Pro Bowls, and 4 MVPs, retire with the all-time rushing record at the time of over 12,000 yards, racked up 106 rushing touchdowns, and you name it. There, you can go on and on about Jim Brown, but generally, he's kind of discussed as one of the best NFL players of all time, if not the best. So getting a player like that at number 6 definitely can be considered a steal. Now, the next pick was drafted in 1996 and also has a legendary name. And it's linebacker Ray Lewis out of Miami, who's picked 26th overall by Baltimore. And we all have seen his 17-year illustrious career. He was a key star on 2 Super Bowl teams, won a Super Bowl MVP, cranked out 7 All-Pro seasons, 13 Pro Bowls, and 2 NFL Defensive Player of the Year awards. And by the time he retired, retiring off a Super Bowl, he was considered one of the greatest tackling linebackers that we've ever seen. And he was the leader in that stat of all time. So when you look at the result of his career compared to where he was picked at number 26 overall, Baltimore definitely got the better end of that draft deal. And next up on the list is quarterback Joe Montana, who was drafted in 1979 out of Notre Dame by the San Francisco 49ers. And although he was picked at number 82, which seems a little ridiculous in hindsight, he was a national champion when he was at ND. And that slight might have come because he was a little undersized at the time, and he was hardly the quarterback prototype of his day. But he went on to win 4 Super Bowls, be named to 3 All-Pro teams, and 8 Pro Bowls, a 2-time NFL MVP, a 3-time Super Bowl MVP, and arguably the greatest quarterback the game had ever seen. But whether people still consider him the top quarterback or not, he's still the one who will always be known as the quarterback who put the West Coast offense on the map, and not just that, but into overdrive. Now moving on, next up is out of Mississippi Valley State, which a lot of people may know for another player, but this time we're talking about defensive end Deacon Jones, who was drafted in 1961 at, get this, 168th overall by Los Angeles. So the Rams were able to get who is now known as the godfather of the pass rush at number 186. Talk about a steal. He rewarded them with 11 years in LA, 5 straight All-Pro seasons, 7 straight Pro Bowls. And although there were a lot of good players in the draft, only 5 players besides him ended up in the Hall of Fame. So the fact that he made it to 186 sounds wrong up front, and it doesn't even feel right the more you look into it. To make matters even worse about where he was picked, only 26 of the 96 players that came after him ever saw professional game time at all. So that just makes Deacon Jones stand out head and shoulders above the rest of his class and above a lot of defensive ends in history, period. Now, moving down the list, we're going to stick with Mississippi Valley State alums and name wide receiver Jerry Rice as the next pick. He was taken in 1985 at 16th by San Francisco, and really from there, the rest is history. The fact that 3 pass catchers went before him, even though he was a statistical superstar in a high-volume offense at Mississippi Valley State, he probably was overlooked, sadly, because he comes from a smaller school that isn't in a Power 5 conference. But his numbers, even to this day, are still mind-boggling to the point where it doesn't even make sense to ignore a player that's coming out of a program that might not be on the main stage. And looking at his career numbers and his 16 years in San Francisco, it just makes sense as to why he's considered the best wide receiver of all time. Because he was named to 10 All-Pro teams in 11 years, 11 straight Pro Bowls, an NFL MVP, a Super Bowl MVP, and a 2-time NFL Offensive Player of the Year. So, yeah, definitely deserves to be in the conversation of one of the greatest players, not just at the position, but in football that we've ever seen. And that brings us to the top dog in drafts of all time, and anybody who follows football can probably guess who it is. At this point, it's not a secret. It's quarterback Tom Brady, who was drafted in 2000 out of Michigan. And we all know the story of Tom Brady. You may not know much about him in college, but at this point, it doesn't even matter much because at pick 199, that's really the only trivia question answer about Tom Brady that you would need to know, as it still comes up constantly to this day about how the New England Patriots managed to stumble on the biggest dumb luck draft pick of all time. And it'll always give deep football fans a reason to want to watch drafts until the final pick, because you're just hoping that your team can pull off what New England did and find a diamond in the rough and your next franchise superstar in one of the later rounds where no one is checking for them. But in terms of value, talent, production, with over 70,000 yards, 500 touchdowns, 6 Super Bowls, 4 Super Bowl MVPs, 3 NFL MVPs, 3 All-Pro honors, 14 Pro Bowl selections, it would just be plain silly to say at this point that Tom Brady isn't the best quarterback at all time. And the fact that they got him at pick 199, and the fact that many players that were taken in that draft couldn't even come close to what Brady accomplished is just astounding, that they were able to find something in a place that nobody, even to today, is looking for it. And it's so unbelievable to the point where we could reasonably expect that no other pick is going to come out of that late point in the draft and reach the levels that we've seen Brady reach ever again. So thanks for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.